Good morning, Royal High School woodshop students. Welcome to the woodshop. This morning I want to introduce you to a very unique project that we are going to do today. So today as we get started, we want to try and encapsulate this entire process of woodworking into one very condensed, short period and complete a project in the doing of that. So literally start to finish, we want to look at what does it look like to create a project. As we do this, we really want to take a tour of all the machines in the wood shop, right? There's a lot of them. Now we're not going to see every single machine. In most projects, we don't use every single machine, but we certainly use a lot of them. And so we want to take a tour of all the tools in the wood shop and see how they work, what it looks like to use them together with other machines in order to create a project. This also gives us a chance to see just how fast a project can come together. Once I have an idea, once I have some direction on where I'm going with this, it doesn't take that long if I know what I'm doing and I know what machines I need to use. I've heard it referred to really as an orchestra of sorts, right? Of an orchestra. In the same way an orchestra has a piece of sheet music that they're going to play, we have a piece of music, right? It's called a plan of procedure or a working drawing that guides what we're going to do. And in the same way, like an orchestra, you're not just playing whatever you want to, you're playing towards this sheet of music. You're doing exactly what's on the sheet of music, and in the end result is amazing. Same thing here. We're going to take all these individual machines, we're going to put them all together, using them to get to a final goal, which is what's on the sheet music or the plan, the drawing behind us. And in the end, we end up with this beautiful project. Today, we're going to look at building this right here, right? This is our symphony, if you will. Now, I want to introduce you as well to a special guest, right? To just give you his input on this concept of the woodworking process. This is Mr. Rennie. I work closely with Mr. Rennie from Simi High School. So without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Rennie.
Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Rennie over here at Simi Valley High School. If you haven't figured it out yet, Mr. Sorensen and I, we kind of work together on a lot of things. And this idea today, this tape that you're going to be watching, we call it our one period project. Because our challenges within the period, within about an hour's time, we're going to start with some rough wood, end up with a finished project. Now he makes one project, I tend to make another, okay? Quite often because we can always use boxes. Once you know how to use the tools, guess what? You can make anything you want. You can make any alterations you want. My favorite tool, one of them is absolutely the lathe, but just knowing how to use a lathe is not enough. You need to know how to use a variety of tools. Scroll saw here, like so many others, you gotta know how to tune the tool so that it's gonna be working absolutely perfect for you, okay? Single tool by itself, not good enough. To go with the lathe, I need all the associated lathe tools. I need a grinder so I can sharpen. You need to know a bunch of tools. So here's the deal. Today, what you're going to see is the orchestration of a symphony. We're not going to be using just one instrument. As nice of an instrument as a scroll saw is, we need other tools. So we're going to go ahead and, following a plan of procedure and a plan, the dimension drawing and the cut list, we're going to orchestrate, use all of these tools together to create a symphony that ultimately leads to a completed project.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rennie, for that very concise description of this woodworking process, right? And how it makes for a beautiful symphony, or what we in the woodworking field might call a project. So to start the process of building this one period project, we need a sheet of music like a symphony would start with. We're going to start with our drawing here. Now, you've seen me take a few minutes to think through and add the last remaining details. We have the shapes defined here on the board. We have their overall sizes written on the board and any notes that we might need to help us through this process. That's what a set of plans is for. And anytime we build something, we got to start there. We got to start by putting our idea down on a piece of paper so that we have all the necessary information to build this project. Now our job is to take this information from the board, from the working drawing, from the plan, put it into the stock, right? Get our stock and begin to work with the piece of wood that we're going to build out of. We're going to transfer all that information onto that piece of wood, cut it out, do all the necessary details that are shown here, and then assemble it, and there it is. So let's get started. All right, well, here is my plan. The plan is a 3-view drawing. I'm looking directly down at the top of the project. This is the front. I'm looking at the front of the project, and this is the side view. So a working drawing requires 3 views so that I have all the material, all the plan, all the dimensions, all the details necessary to build. So I've taken a minute to think that through and put that all down on a piece of paper. That's where every good project starts. Now what I need to do is I need to transfer that drawing from the board to the actual piece of wood, and I need to get started building. So let's do that. Let's take this drawing now and go back into the wood shop and get started putting this whole 1-period project together. And you can check the clock and see how fast it takes us to do this. I have the stock that I'm going to use here, and I have some tools that I'm going to need to do this project. These are common layout tools used in the wood shop. I've got a ruler, just in case I need long straight lines. I've got a tri-square. I always want to make sure I'm wearing my safety glasses. I've got my tape measure and a pencil. I also have some templates, right? Those are terms that should be familiar because I know that this particular project with it, which is a shelf, will require some different shapes, and it takes too long and it's a lot harder if I try to draw the shapes on the spot. So it's very helpful in most cases to move forward quickly if I have things like templates. And I've also got my ear protection for some of the machines that are going to require that. So now I'm going to get started here taking and applying my drawing onto my project. The first thing I want to do, obviously I have a big 6-foot, 7-foot board here. It's pretty heavy. This is called sapel. Sapel. It looks like mahogany. It's red. I don't want to carry a 6-foot board, 7-foot board around trying to do stuff to it. What I want to do is condense everything I need to make into a smaller board, cut off what I need, and then I've got what I need to work with. So I'm going to do that here. I noticed that this end of the board is covered with paint, so I'm going to switch that around. This board, the end of this board here is nice. I'm going to use that. I'm going to look at my drawing. The shelf is 18 inches long, so I need about 18 inches. Now my 7 steps says always rough cut your board a little bit longer than you need it to start with. So I'm going to add a little bit more than 18 here. The ledger that's going to go on the wall on my shelf is about 13 inches. So next to my 18-inch piece, I'm going to put in about 13. And again, I'm going to make it a little bit long. The ledger is 3 1/4 inches. 3 1/4. But this board isn't wide enough to put anything next to the ledger. So I also have the 2 corbels. So those are going to have to come at the end of the ledger. Now, the corbels, right, this shape allows me to draw one here and then flip this over like that and draw one next to it, and I can condense the space. That's called nesting. When I nest the pieces together, I get more out of a smaller amount of material. So I'm going to put that on there. The corbel is 6¼ inches tall. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to put a mark at about 7. That gives me a little bit of extra material. So there is my final mark. And then I'm going to mark the side with an X that is waist. All right, so the first thing I want to do now is I'm going to take this and I'm going to get that waist off of here so I can start working with this. This is the modern version of the radial arm saw because the head of the saw slides forward. That gives me a cut almost 13 to 14 inches wide. So we're going to start with that. Again, I don't need to be too precise here because I'm rough cutting my board to length. Rough cutting means make it 1 inch longer than what you need. All right, there's the extra amount, which is pretty heavy, that I don't need. All right, well now I have the piece of wood in a really usable form that I can start to work with. This board here didn't come from Home Depot, and the reason I know that is because the surface, the face of this board is covered with bandsaw marks. So I don't have any of this board that I can work with. It's as rough can be on all 4 sides. So I'm going to really have to use my 7 steps here to get this in working condition. So the first thing I really want to do is get one face and then one edge flat and at a right angle to each other. So the piece of wood is over 1 inch thick, which also means it didn't come from Home Depot. So it gives me some room to flatten this face. I'm going to look for the face with a cup in it. That's this one. This is convex, right? This comes out like that. This goes in. This is the surface that I can flatten on the joiner. So I'm going to take this to the joiner to start with. Now I heard it cut, fade out, and cut. That means it has a little bit of a curve in the middle. I need to do that multiple times to get it flat. Just a tiny spot right there. Now my shelf is 4½ inches wide. So after joining one edge flat and square to the face, I'm going to go ahead and cut my second edge at 4½. That takes care of the 4½ cut and the 4½ width. the widest area of my board, the thickest part of my board right now is about 7/8. The thinnest part is right at about 3/4. As we learned in our 7 steps, I need to bring the entire thickness of the board down to 3/4. Right now, because I flattened it on the joiner, part of it is 3/4, part of it is almost 1 inch. Well, now I have material that's a little better suited to work with. It's actually flat on 2 sides. These 2 sides are parallel to one another, as well as these 2 edges. Now I need to start laying out all my parts. So I'm going to use the tools that I have here and draw out all the parts of my box on this piece of Sapel. So I have an 18-inch shelf. Now, whenever I do this, I'm going to put multiple pieces on the same board. I also have to remember about something called a kerf. To remember what a kerf is. A kerf is the blank, empty space that follows after a blade. And on a table saw or chop saw, that's 1/8 of an inch. So if I'm going to put multiple pieces next to each other, before I cut, I have to leave room for the blade to pass between them when I cut them out. So I'll put a second mark and a second line. There's my kerf. Now I'm ready to go on and put the next piece. The next piece was the ledger. The ledger is 13 inches long. And I had the corbels after that. So I'm going to go ahead and put another mark 1/8 of an inch away from that. I'm going to draw those 2 lines on here. There's room for my blade to pass through. Now, right here, my ledger is 3 1/4. 1, 2, 3 1/4. Three and 1/4. So I'll turn my ruler. My shelf is 4 1/2. The last piece that we need to add are the corbels. The corbels sit against the wall like this. The shelf rests on them. It keeps the shelf from sagging down as you put weight on it. The corbels, remember, I'm going to put 2 corbels in this small space down here. So I'll start like that. And then to get the next one, I'm just going to simply turn it around like that. All right, my work is drawn. Let's go cut. All right, well, here are my 3 pieces that are now cut out of my board. My shelf piece is actually finished. This is the size it needs to be. I'm just gonna notch each of the 2 front corners to give it a decorative look to it. I'll route it. This is done. I now need to go back to the table saw. I'm gonna cut the ledger out. It's time to cut the corbels to the right spot as well on both the chop saw to length and the bandsaw to shape. All right, well, the ledger is 3.5 inches. So I'm going to set my fence to 3.5. My corbels are cut to length. Now I need to go cut the shape of them out on the bandsaw. All right, well, there's my corbels ready to go. Now, corbels cut on a bandsaw always have to be sanded, right? The bandsaw never creates products that go directly into a piece of furniture. I got to take these and sand them now. Well, I'll start my sanding right here at the oscillating spindle sander. I want to pick the biggest spindle. So I'm going to pick the biggest spindle possible for the curve that I'm sanding. And I want to remember to put my throat plate in. Now the spindle sander really only does the inside of a curve, so once I'm done with that, I have to take them over to the other sanders. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to come over to the disc sander now and try to finish this up. All right, well, I'm back here to the spindle sander to clean it up. Now I'm going to blend what I sanded here to the sanding that I did at the spindle sander. Well, my pieces are almost done now. The corbels are finished. Those are ready to route. The ledger and the shelf just need some embellishments. They need some decorative pieces cut out of them, and then they're ready to route, and it's time to assemble the shelf. So my picture on the board has a little half circle or a quarter circle taken out of the corners of the shelf itself. So I'm going to come over here to a template for that, and I will grab my pencil, and I'm just going to take a little notch out of each corner. Next, the ledger had, on my picture, it has a little decorative right in the center. A decorative design right in the center. So the first thing I got to do is find the middle. It's 13 inches long. That would make it 6.5 inches to the center. Now my decorative pattern has the little center point, right? That's where it comes into this point. So I'm just going to set that on there. right in the middle. I'm going to cut these and then we're ready to route. Well, my cuts are done. These have to be sanded, and now we're finished with our basic cutout. Well, I need the biggest spindle possible. So this was a pretty big curve. I need to go back to my big spindle. All right, well, I brought my pieces back to the router, and I'm ready to route the detail on. The basic shelf is done. So I've got all the parts. There's the piece that's going to go in the back. There's the corbel that's going to go on the end. And there's the shelf that's going to go on top of it. So we're really pretty close to being done. The last thing I need to really do is put the detail on the edges of these products. So I've brought all the pieces back here to the router, and I am in the process of making sure I have the right router bits on here. So this router table has the right router bit. This router bit has been changed, so I'm going to take a second and put this one back on there. For this project, we're going to use two different router bits. We're going to use something called a roundover bit. We'll use that on the corbel. Because the corbels are fairly thin, and if we're going to route on both sides of them, then we need a very small bit to do that. On the shelf and on the ledger that goes on the wall, we're only going to route one edge, the edge that stands out towards us. We're not going to route the edge that faces the wall. And so we're going to put a nicer, more decorative router bit called a OG bit on there. Okay, so I've got my router put together. I'm going to put it back into the machine. So I'm going to start with this router table here. This is the Roman OG bit. And this is the table where I'm going to do my corbels. The first thing I want to do whenever I route is route a piece of scrap wood to make sure my router bit is set up right. So I'm now going to move over to my radius bit here, roundover bit, on my corbels. There it is. Well, I'm going to stop here just long enough to take stock of what I've got. I just finished routing. There it is. Very quickly, I'm just about to my final product. Now, the next thing that I need to do is, I notice on my drawing that I have holes here so that I can mount this to the wall. Holes are put on with a drill. I'm going to need to go lay those out, put the holes on, and then I think it's time to sand and nail this thing together. So let's head out to the drill press. All right, well, here I am at the drill press, and the first thing I need to do is lay out my holes where they're going to go. So I look at my plan, and the plan says they're going to be centered on this little decorative ledger. Now the ledger is kind of decorated, so the center is kind of relative to where I am on this board. It's about 1 3/4 in from each side. So I'll start with that. I'm going to mark 1 3/4 in, put a line from each side. Now, right at that point, I'm going to measure across the board, right? Because the board is tapered, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and measure across the board at that mark. Right at that mark, the board is about 3 inches, which is very lucky for me. 3 inches means I'm going to divide 3 in half. Half of 3 is 1.5 inches. So I'm going to put a line out 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing at the other end. Right where my mark is, 1 3/4 in from the end, I'm going to measure over 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to take my tri-square and darken those in. All right, and you can see right here, you can see that I've got a point here and a point there. There's where I'm going to drill my hole. So I'm going to drill 2 holes here. I'm going to start with the bigger drill. This is a Forstner drill. So you might be asking yourself, why are you putting 2 holes in the same spot? Well, that's a good question. Here's why. So the first hole is the bigger hole. That hole is so I can put a cap over the screw. Once I screw this in and it's up against the wall, I want to be able to cap off the screw. The caps are 3/8 of an inch in diameter. So I need a 3/8 inch hole that goes in a little way for the cap. The second hole is the hole that goes all the way through the board so that when I put my screw in, it doesn't strip the screw or crack the board. All right, so I have my wood set up in the right spot. The drill bit's going to go in the right spot. This is a good place to bring my parallel clamp or my hand screw in. Then I can reach way out here and clamp that piece of wood down to the table so it won't lift up. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, I've got it set up, my Forstner bit here. I've got it, my block of wood clamped down with my hand screw so it's not gonna accidentally lift up and get spinning around on the drill. Now I'm ready to drill. Now I'm gonna do 2 things. The first hole, I'm gonna bore a hole. Boring, right, we've learned about that. We've talked about that in our Christmas tree project. Boring a hole in there means I'm only gonna go in a little way. I just want enough for the head of the screw to go in and to be able to put a cap on, and that's it. I do not want this hole to go all the way through. All right, so the first hole has been bored into the ledger. That goes in about 1/4 inch. Now, so the screw doesn't split that ledger apart when you drive the screw in, I'm going to go ahead and take the Forstner bit out, and I'm going to put a twist bit in here. All right, last one. That hole goes all the way through. Ah, we can see right through there. Right, there's the second hole and the first hole. Okay, one we can see through, the other one only goes in a little bit. All right, well, before I nail this all together, there are certain parts that are gonna do a lot better if I've already sanded them. It's really hard to get into corners when you've already glued and nailed pieces together. So for this, I'm gonna bring into our picture here something called a random orbital sander. Random orbital sander is one of the tools we've learned about, and it tries to minimize the scratching that is seen on a project. I don't want to sand off a lot, so I'm going to turn the speed down a little bit. All I want to do is just get the pencil marks off that I put on there to lay stuff out, and if I burned anything while I was routing, I can do that as well, and then I should be ready to put this together. And because I don't want to really breathe any of the sawdust, I'm going to go ahead and put my mask on. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to do the last little bit by hand. If I use a power sander to do edges that have been radiused or have been routed with a router, I tend to lose the router decoration. All right, well, I think that's it. My last step now is going to be to put this together. And the fastest, easiest way is to do this with a nail gun. So let's bring the pneumatic nail gun in here. We'll put some glue on it and we'll finish up the assembly of our small wall shelf. All right, well, back when my dad was in high school, he would have had to assemble this shelf with a hammer like that. Maybe even when I was in high school, but in modern days, we're gonna assemble that shelf with a nail gun. So Instead of hammering the nails in, this gun is going to drive the nails in using air. Now I'm going to put a little bit bigger nails into this nail gun. It's got to go through 3/4 inch stock and then into our shelf. And then we're ready to assemble this. Now I want to be careful when I use a nail gun. Very dangerous piece of equipment. Here we go. Let's start by gluing. So let's glue the corbels on first. I'm going to start by putting glue on the end grain. As we will learn this semester, end grain does not take glue very well, and it doesn't glue together very well. So we need some strategies to help us get this to stay together as long as possible. The nail will help. Making sure we have a good amount of glue on here will also help. Now I don't want to put the glue on the end grain onto a dry piece of wood. So while I'm waiting for that glue to soak in a little bit, I'm just going to put a tiny bit of glue on my corbel. Alright, so that looks good. Now I'm going to have a rag here with me just in case I get any of the glue onto the actual shelf itself. I can wipe that all off. I want to make sure everything is lined up really well before I drive these nails in. I also want to make sure that my fingers are nowhere near where this nail could reach. So it's about 1.5 inch long nail. I'm going to keep my fingers back from that. All right, one down, one to go. All right. Corbels are on. Last thing I need to do is put on my shelf. So I want to make sure my shelf is centered on here. With my shelf on there now correctly, I'm going to mark up here on the top where I want the nail to go. And then I'm going to use my tri-square to draw a light line. I'll have to sand those off. All right, there it is. The construction phase of my wall shelf is done. Now I'll come back. Looks pretty good. All right, well, there's the last little bit. I want to set the nails that didn't go all the way in so that I can put some filler over them when I'm done. Last thing that you always do with a nice project is put finish on it. So this is no exception. I'm going to go ahead and take some mineral oil and put some mineral oil on this project. And boy, I can see the color just by dropping the mineral oil on there. I can see the color start to pop out. You might be able to see that too from where you're at. Wow, this is beautiful wood. This is called sapel. All right, well, there you have it. There is a project in one class period. We took a look at a lot of the machines that are in this class. We put them all together. We followed basically a sheet of music, right? That's what's on the board. That's our music. That's our directions that we're going to follow. And then we took all the different instruments, the different machines that are around the class, and we put them right where they need to be. And then we played that music. And out of it came a beautiful shelf, right? Just like playing Beethoven, getting a sheet of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and playing it with a bunch of knowledgeable musicians makes for a beautiful, beautiful sound. Knowing how to use this equipment and knowing the order and the purpose and the time and the place to use all this equipment does the same thing, right? It makes beautiful music as well. Although, right, the music that it makes looks a little bit different, right? The beauty that it creates looks a little bit different. But here's a beautiful shelf that anybody would be proud to hang on their wall, and we made it in about an hour or less. All right, well, I will finish up all the teeny minute details here. I just got to get all of this finished into the tiny cracks and crevices, but you need to go on your way. So thank you for joining me in this 1 hour project.